It's hard whenever something like that happens in your life because you think, God, I followed you all this time, and then you've let this one thing that I didn't want to happen to me. And I feel like you've given me more than I can handle, God, because you've taken away my kid or somebody that I love. When I talked about this just about a week ago, whenever I was speaking about how we lost our daughter, and you just think, why would a loving God allow it to happen? Well, it's interesting that God has allowed us several things in this life. He's allowed us to have free choice, and He's allowed us to live in a world that actually has sin around it. Our world is a sinful world, and there's death and there's destruction and random events. Hurricanes, tornadoes, all these different things happen, and there's lost life because we live in this fallen world. God can't say, I'm going to protect every single person who says that, acknowledges me as God. That means cars turn into rubber when they run into each other. Bullets don't work on you. We just live in a fallen world. And so there's going to be loss. And sometimes we just can't explain that loss, but we know that in the reality, in the end, God is going to be there and take care of us. And I shared the story where we were able to share with another couple, and they were able to share with us. So sometimes we can look back and say, God, this was the worst thing in my life, but what I can see is how you've allowed me to minister to others, or how you've changed me and prepared me for some other type of ministry. Because God will turn this terrible situation from this fallen world into something that can glorify Him, into something that we can use to reach and to minister to somebody else.
Okay, good. Thanks for sharing, Jeff. Marty?
That is an especially sensitive question. And there's actually somebody here on the panel I think would be much more qualified than I am to speak to address that, having been in those shoes, and I haven't. Nevertheless, I'll make my attempt at it. I think that one of the profound things, the most profound thing about God coming into this world as a man is the fact that He was willing to subject Himself to the same pain and the same sorrow and the same anguish that we endure. And sometimes we feel that God is so distant and so detached from our problems. We think that He cannot relate, or that He doesn't hear, or that He doesn't care. I was thinking of a quote I saw by Dorothy Sayers. She said, for whatever reason God chose to make man as he is, limited and suffering and subject to sorrows and death, He had the honesty and the courage to take His own medicine. And I think it's such a powerful statement when we think that God, who was under no obligation to become like us, but He did, and subjected Himself to the same pain and the same sorrow that we endure. But it's part of this world as we presently endure it. And the other thing I would just say is that it's hard for me to say this in this person's place, but death is really not the ultimate tragedy. I know it may seem that way. But the ultimate tragedy is not death, because Jesus conquered death. He conquered death. And that foe, death, has been vanquished. And we will soon see the other side of this. So trust in God. If you're here tonight, if you ask that question, trust in God.
Thank you. Do you want to?
We never want to belittle anyone's loss or their pain in any form or fashion. I think that each and every person who has experienced some loss in your family, whether a loved one has been in an accident, killed, or murder, or whatever, the loss of a child, even before birth, we want to always be there for that person to encourage them in that time and that pain and suffering. But there is something about our pain and our suffering that it brings us in that relationship with Jesus Christ, who, as Marty shared, who suffered far beyond what any human being should have suffered. And for God to have felt the pain at the loss of His Son, He knows our pain. And I think that's why Paul wrote in 2 Corinthians, the first chapter, beginning with verse 3, praise be to the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Father of compassion and the God of all comfort, who comforts us in all of our troubles, so that we can comfort those in any trouble with the comfort we ourselves have received from God. For just as the sufferings of Christ flow over into our lives, so also through Christ our comfort overflows. If we are distressed, it is for your comfort and salvation. If we are comforted, it is for your comfort, which produces in you patient endurance of the same sufferings we suffer. And our hope is for you is to be firm, because we know that just as you share in our sufferings, so also will you share in our comfort. I read all that because I just think that passage is so powerful about when we go through these times of affliction or these times of suffering or pain, to realize that Christ has been there. He knows the situation. He pleads as our mediator, our lawyer in heaven before the Father. And I believe the Father has a way of helping to inject into our lives what is needed at that time. It purifies us. It changes us, sure. Sometimes some people, it changes them for the worse. But I've seen where a lot of times people have gone through great pain, great suffering. They begin to shine like diamonds because they have been pressured and changed to become more in the image of Jesus Christ.